I got to tell you, you're like an answer to, I don't know if we want to say prayers or requests, but we've had multiple shows where the topic of radon has come up. It's a hot topic. It's concerning for a lot of folks. I think there are probably parts of the country where it's a bigger concern than others, but I'm sure we're going to dive into this deeper. But let's start out with a bird's eye view, a 30,000 foot view of the issue at hand and how concerned people should be.
Radon is an odorless, tasteless, invisible gas that occurs from the decay of uranium in the ground. Uranium is a naturally occurring element all over the world, but more specifically in the United States. Obviously, radon's been detected in all 50 states, and believe it or not, Alaska is one of the highest reporting radon levels of any of the states. So when uranium decays, there's a decay chain, and when it gets so far, radon is one of those things. And so when that radon begins to decay, it puts off what's called radon decay particles, and that is lead, polonium 214. So there's 214, 218, and there's another P one that I can never remember, but those get in and they float. So they float infinitely. They don't really settle or sink or rise. They just kind of float there at a molecular level. And as those things float around, you breathe them in. And so when you breathe those in, they actually attach to lung tissue. And as that radon element continues to decay, it puts off tiny like microbursts of energy. And that's what actually causes the lung tissue damage. So there's a lot of comparisons out there. So if you live in a house with a 4.0, which is measured in picocuries per liter, if you're in Canada, it's measured in becquerels per meter cubed. But when you breathe those in, so living in a home with a 4.0 is the equivalent in lung tissue damage of smoking about 4 or 8 cigarettes a day. There's another pretty interesting comparison. And so like if you go get an x-ray, right, they put the thing on you and they're all protected and all that. And they say, I can't remember the number, but they say there's only so many x-rays you're supposed to have in a year's time. And if you live in a home with an elevated radon level, you're experiencing hundreds of times the radon exposure than you would from a single x-ray. The problem is, right, it's odorless, it's tasteless, it's invisible. Most people don't think about it until they go to sell their home. And that's when most people test for radon during a real estate transaction. In Illinois especially, that's where radon really started to gain some traction. Was it became so prevalent in real estate transactions that people were like, my aunt sold their home and they had to test for radon. I've never even heard of radon. I'm going to test for it. So as it becomes more and more prevalent in those real estate transactions, it's really taken off into the consumer market as well. And we get, I would say we're probably right now somewhere between 70-30, 60-40 doing real estate involved work and concerned homeowners that call us and they've heard about it from somewhere or another, and they either A, want to have a test, or B, they bought like a home monitor and they've seen that their levels are elevated and they're ready to talk about mitigation.
So there are, I guess there's home monitors. Are those just as good, or is there a quality? Like, do you have one that's say better or more sensitive?
We carry a couple for like diagnostic use. Say we've got a home, older homes prior to 1980 rarely have gravel underneath the substrate, underneath that concrete, and that makes mitigation pretty tough. It's kind of like taking a shop vac and sticking it in the mud, right? The effect that you're going to get is very little output. And so the way that we combat that is a lot of times we'll use multiple suction points throughout a basement just to increase the surface area that we're trying to draw through. And we might get up to 3 suction points, and we may have flow that is kind of on the line, right? I'm always shooting for around 60 CFM of air coming through the pipe at a minimum. And maybe we're up to 3 suction points. We're trying not to put any more pipe or holes in the ground, but maybe we're at 50. We'll use some radon monitors as a diagnostic to see if those levels are dropping. We use radon eye. Long way to get to the answer there, but we use radon eye. We've also had pretty good luck with EcoSense, which they make an Eco Cube, and then there's also Air Things. We also do testing, and there's quite a bit of regulation on testing, and so the monitors that we use for testing, they're around $700 or $800. They do a 48-hour exposure. Those are Air Things, and so those are like the best Air Things monitor you can buy. Again, they're like $700-800. But Air Things makes some home monitors, and so any of those brands, Radon Eye, Air Things, EcoSense, all good. The Radon Eye is the most expensive. I think those are around $200, and then I think EcoSense has some that you can get into for around $130. Based off of data that they've taken from all the measurement professionals in Illinois, they estimate 50% of the homes, if you tested every one in Illinois, would come back high.
I'll be completely honest with you. I'm ignorant to all of this. So
Yeah.
I live in an area where I've been told it's not a concern. Where I grew up, it is a concern, but we were too poor to be able to take care of it anyway. So I know very little. So let me summarize and make me sound dumb for a second, and then you fill in the gaps here. I have a house, and let's just say I find out that there is radon in my house. What are we doing here? We're pulling air out of the crawl space and spitting it outside, and that's it? I mean, what are we doing here?
Are you in an area predominantly on crawl space, very little basements?
Yes. Yeah, there are some basements, but I'm in an area where there's swamps and things like that. So we don't see a lot of basements. We see crawl spaces and we see slabs. How's the building slab?
On a crawl space, we would encapsulate and then depressurize. So we take a 10 mil membrane. We seal all that. So we seal all that to make an airtight seal. And then what we do is we bring that suction, we take the fan, plumb it into that crawl space, and then we use a deck, right? So we take a deck, we seal over the top of that. That piping comes down through that deck and it depressurizes all that area under the encapsulation material. So not only do you encapsulate, you depressurize. And crawl space mitigations are usually very, very effective because there's not a lot of resistance to the system. So in a basement, what you would do is you would get out on the perimeter somewhere, especially in a newer home, because you're going to have a drain tile that you can work with. You get out in the perimeter, and what you do is you core like a 5-inch hole down through the ground, and then we take an auger bit down into that hole and we excavate what they call a suction pit, and it's anywhere from 5 to 15 gallons depending on the substrate material and how hard we think we're going to have to fight to get flow. And then you plumb that fan in, and then that area again, if you've got gravel, it just pulls through that gravel and depressurizes. The technical term for it is sub-slab depressurization.
So you do that, and then the person tests again and there's no radon in the house. I know this is a dumb question, but I'm just
never
trying to
zero
understand.
Never zero. So again, the EPA says the safe level is a 4.0. We guarantee 3.9 or lower. We see a lot of 1s, 0.8s, 1s after mitigation, right? So you mitigate to a very, very low level. It's never zero. So the gentleman that we very first started buying all our supplies from, he was the largest mitigator in upstate Illinois for 20 years. And we asked about it, and it's like, can you ever get it all? And he said, no, it's a gas, right? It's going to find every nook, every cranny, every anything. It's going to find its way up through. And so it's especially worse in the wintertime. You're very familiar with stack effect, right? So as an HVAC guy, you're very familiar with stack effect. In the wintertime, you're putting warm air in, and it's constantly doing this number right here, which creates a suction against the lower parts of the house, and it draws radon gases up. So you get a lot more elevated. And then in the wintertime, you're never opening the window. You're always, closing the door as quickly as possible. So
even the houses that you're encapsulating the crawl and creating that airtight seal, you can't get them to zero?
I've never seen one come back zero. Like I said, we get them to sub 1 all the time, 0.8, 0.7, somewhere in there. The average outdoor level it's like a 1.3, right? So you have so much diffusion in the air. So I would say you probably get some coming back in from outside, you know what I mean? To some degree, right? Nothing is totally airtight. It comes from somewhere. It's gas.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very cool.